everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Mel. Thank you so much for joining me today for a genre wrap-up. Historical fiction, literary fiction, contemporary fiction, classics, and non-fiction. So before we get into the video, I just wanted to make sure everyone could see my shirt. I've had the shirt for a while now, but I usually wear it in such a way that it's a bit tricky to see, but I'm changing the angles slightly today, so hopefully you can all see it. Yeah, I feel like this is almost always the case, so that's my shirt. Anyway, as I said, today's wrap-up is going to be my genre wrap-up for historical fiction, literary fiction, contemporary fiction, non-fiction, and classics. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have read all of these books, but that's the scope of genre we're going to be talking about today. For anyone that's new, I decided a few months ago that I was going to start doing genre wrap-ups, and each genre will be for a period of 3 months. So this is the contemporary etc. for the periods of August, September and October. Also, before we get started in the actual wrap-up, 2 things I wanted to let you know about quickly. First of all, anyone that I talk about in this video, I will link in the description below so you can go and check them out. Particularly G from Book Roast, because I have been using CAWPILE, which is the rating system that G created. She has put together spreadsheets with a whole bunch of data that you can put together for all the books that you read, so you can keep track of everything from when they were published, whether they are own voices, whereabouts in the world the author came from, all of that sort of stuff, the genre, etc. And there's also a notes section where I have been writing all my notes for what I thought of the books. So yeah, I wanted to mention that because it's a really useful tool for me anyway. I know quite a few people use it as well. So it's CAWPILE because that stands for character, action, writing style, plot, intrigue, logic, as in the internal logic of the story, and enjoyment. So it's just a way that you break down your rating out of 10, which then converts to a rating out of 5, so we can go on Goodreads and all of that sort of thing. So that is what I have been using. Like I said, I will link G's channel in the description below so you can go and check her out and subscribe, and also go and find CAWPILE if that is something that you think would be interesting for you. Alright, so let's get started. The first book that I have to talk about today is a book that I read back in August, and that is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. So this is technically the first book in a trilogy, but I say technically because they're kind of companion novels, so they don't follow the same main characters. So the first one, which is The Kiss Quotient, we follow Michael and Stella. Michael is working as a male escort. Stella is on the autism spectrum and she feels like she doesn't really know how to have a relationship. So she hires Michael as an escort so that she can sort of learn how to have a relationship, because she thinks that the best way for her to be happy and fit into society is to be in a relationship. And it goes from there. As you would imagine, it being a romance novel, romance ensues. Yeah, so that's the general plot of The Kiss Quotient. So the first thing that I need to mention is that this book deals with neurodivergency, specifically autism. I am not autistic, so take what I have to say with a grain of salt. You should go and check out other autistic or neurodivergent people's thoughts on this and own voices thoughts on this. I believe that Helen Hoang is autistic, so I believe that the book itself is own voices in that sense. Now, I have heard some very mixed reviews about this one from a few different people who identify as autistic or neurodivergent. Some people have really enjoyed it. Some people felt that they were not very well represented and that the portrayal of autism in the book is not very respectful. Some people who identify as autistic thought the opposite and really enjoyed the book and thought that it was very well representative. I think that that speaks to the fact that autism is a spectrum, and just as a neurotypical person might be vastly different from other people who are also neurotypical, a neurodivergent person will have a vastly different opinion of another neurodivergent person's feeling and opinion, including of course Helen Hoang herself. So while I'm not trying to tell the people who found that the book wasn't very well representative that they're wrong, because obviously that's their opinion, and if they didn't feel seen and it's a book that's talking about an experience that they can relate to, then, you know, that's their feeling and that's fair enough. But I just find that, you know, it's interesting in that sense that neurodivergence as well as neurotypical is not, it doesn't mean like just because I'm white and I live in Australia doesn't mean that my opinion about everything I read is going to be the same as Ellie from Earl Grey Books, even though we have a lot in common and we do talk about a lot of the same books and we enjoy a lot of the same books. It doesn't mean we're going to have the same opinions about everything. And of course the same can be said of anyone who identifies as neurodivergent. I feel like that's probably fairly obvious, but I do also think that sometimes we have a tendency of saying, well, this was written by a person of colour about people of colour, so therefore everyone who is a person of colour is going to completely feel seen and represented by this one example, or the same for neurodivergent. So I just find it really interesting to hear different people who identify as neurodivergent talking about what they liked or didn't like, or how represented they felt by the book. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on that. I just found it interesting. As to my opinion about the book, I quite enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it was my favourite book of all time or even my favourite book of the year, but I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was well written. I loved the characters. I thought they were incredibly well written and well realised. I really felt like I was getting into their heads and learning about their experiences and understanding what they were talking about and what they were going through. So I found that really good and really well done. As to Stella, who is the character who is on the autism spectrum, I personally, as a non-autistic person, as I said before, found it to be quite well written and interesting. I thought she got into the character's head really, really well. But yeah, like I said, grain of salt. So the characters were the thing that I thought really made me enjoy the book. It is a romance. It's not a typical genre that I read hugely often, although I am starting to get more into romances. I thought that a lot of the tropes that were in the book were fairly typical of the kind of romance genre that you would expect. I thought they were well executed. Nothing blew me away. There was nothing particularly original or amazing about the book. I enjoyed it for what it was. I probably won't read it again. I'm happy I read it. If you like contemporary, if you like romance, you'll probably enjoy it. On CAWPILE, I gave this a 6.57, which translates to 3 stars. So yeah, pretty much an okay book, square in the middle. That was the Kiss Quotient. Was it the Kiss Quotient? Yes, it was, by Helen Hoang. The next book that I want to talk to you about today is Am I Normal Yet by Bourne. This is a young adult contemporary, and we follow the main character Evie, who is going into university, but she was recently in a mental institution. I'm not sure exactly how they kind of put it in the book. It's been a little while. But yeah, she was in a facility that was supposed to be helping her with some mental illness because she had a mental breakdown. So yeah, it is very much a book about mental illness and how to navigate having a mental illness and life. How to navigate life when it's not always easy. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one. I thought that it was incredibly well written. It is first person perspective, and I felt like that was an excellent choice for the type of book it was. It really put us in Evie's head and gave us an understanding of what she was experiencing, what her fears were, what her motivations were, and so on, and really, really felt very believable. I found the writing style to be quite simple and straightforward and sort of direct and to the point, which really suited the type of book that it was as well. But having said that, it wasn't dry, or it was still an excellent characterization of this person. It wasn't like we skipped out on what she was feeling. It's just that it was very direct. It wasn't super flowery or anything like that. But like I said, I thought that suited the type of book that it was really, really well. But like I also said, you definitely get a sense of what Evie is feeling and going through, in particular as she tries to navigate being back in regular society and how to juggle I've had this experience. I still have mental health concern, but now I have to try and live with it as much as I can. Yeah, so like I said, I thought this was really well done, really interesting, and I have written here in my notes that I highly recommend this book to anyone who was ever a teenager, which was all of us. So I guess I'm recommending this to everyone. And I still, as a 40-year-old, 41-year-old woman, I still felt like I could connect to the characters. I didn't feel like they were too far away because of how far away teenage is from where I am now. So I thought that was incredibly well done. Sometimes with young adult I do feel like there's a misconnect, but in this one not the case at all. So yeah, highly recommend this one. I gave it an 8.71 in CAWPILE, which is 4 stars, a higher 4 stars, so I'd say that's really 4.5. Just didn't quite make the 5-star, but I think that's probably because, like I said, I am over 20 years since I was a teenager. So it's probably not really intended for me, but still amazing. So the next book that I want to talk to you about is a book that I read in September, and that is The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Danforth. I loved this book. I thought this was such a well-written book. I really felt like I was put directly into Cameron's head and was able to experience what she was experiencing, and yeah, I just thought it was fantastic. So basically it's quite a chunky book. It's like this big, there's a lot that happens, but the essential kind of meat of the story is that Cameron is for the most of the book, Cameron is a teenager. She is exploring her sexuality, discovering that she is queer, but she lives in a town and with a family who are very religious and very much feel that homosexuality is wrong. She's kind of exploring her sexuality in secret, but her aunt figures out what's going on and she is sent to a conversion camp. And yeah, that's the sort of basic storyline. I haven't given any spoilers. This is all what you can see on the blurb. Hopefully that is okay. Like I said, I really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was really well written. I really felt like the author put me right in that person's head and really helped me to understand what that experience would be like. I have no idea whether it's an experience that the author actually had. If you do, please comment and let me know. I didn't know when I was a child or a teenager or even probably a young adult. I didn't know that conversion camps were even a thing. I have no idea whether we have them in Australia. Again, comment below and let me know if you know about that. I feel like though we don't, but again I could be wrong. But either way, it's not something that I had any kind of understanding of or experience of. The first time I ever came across the concept was when I watched a movie, which I can't remember what it's called. Perhaps it will come to me. Hopefully it will come to me and I'll be able to tell you in this video. But it is a kind of comedic take on the concept. But even though it's comedic and fantastic and very funny, it was still such a just weird concept and really upsetting concept. Anyway, so it was interesting for me to explore this thing that I knew was a thing but didn't really understand. When I say interesting, it was quite upsetting in a lot of ways. It's a very upsetting concept that people do that this is a thing that is happening in the world. But yeah, I highly recommend the book. Like I said, I really felt like I was placed in Cameron's head. Cameron obviously is the main character. It's first person point of view, but even having said that, even though we only see the other characters from Cameron's point of view, they're still really well drawn. You still get a real understanding of their motivations, what is going on for them, why they behave the way they behave, which I thought was really fantastic and really, really interesting. In CAWPILE, I gave this a 9, and that means 5 stars. 5 stars, really, really enjoyed it. Definitely think that you should read it. Okay, the next book that I read in September was a book that I buddy read with my friend Michelle, and that is Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. I'm not really sure how to talk about this book. It's not stated on page, but I believe the understanding is that the main character is neurodivergent in some way. Like I said, it's not stated on page, so I couldn't point and say that person is on the autism spectrum or what have you. It's set in Japan, it's translated into English from Japanese. So the main character, whose name I've completely forgotten, believes that she is actually from another planet, and she has this little toy hedgehog who is also from this other planet, and he's kind of like her guardian representative on Earth, and she doesn't fit into the society because she's not from here, she's from another planet. So that's kind of the general premise. Her cousin has a similar experience and neither of them feel like they fit in. We start with them as children and then we follow the main character up into adulthood, and she doesn't want to join the kind of expectations of society. She doesn't want to get married, she doesn't want to have children, she doesn't want to live the kind of life that the expectation is that people will live. But she doesn't feel like she can not do that. But yeah, so I can kind of, I guess, try and give you a bit of a backstory of the story. But how I felt about it, I don't know. It's very out of my comfort zone in the sense that I didn't really understand what the characters were doing or feeling, which is fine. We don't always have to, I mean, like I said before, we don't all have the same experiences, but the characters were very certain that they didn't belong here, that they weren't human. And I found that a bit hard to wrap my head around, and just the way that they kind of explained that, particularly at the end of the book. And I don't want to give any spoilers as to what happens at the end of the book, but things take a turn and they get quite dark, and the very end I was not expecting. Yeah. I obviously am somewhat at a loss for words. I did actually watch a vlog that Lily from Literary Lily did when she read this book. I bring that up because Lily identifies as being autistic, and she was talking about the fact that within the internal logic that the people were living in, their actions, although to me didn't make sense, and weren't okay. Within the internal logic that they were living in, their actions made perfect sense. And I don't know if that's something to do with neurodivergency or whether that's, I don't know. But I found that really interesting, and I can totally see what she means. If you say that these characters consider themselves not human and they consider themselves living in a society that is completely outside of what they themselves believe and what they themselves want to live in, and how they are structured, because of the fact that they're a different brain structure, then it logically made sense. And I get that in the sense that I can see what she means, and that actually helped me a little bit to kind of understand what the author was trying to do. But yeah, I don't really know. As far as ratings go, I gave it a 6.71 on CAWPILE, which is 3 stars. So even though there were sections of the book that I just was like, what is going on here? What are you doing? Oh my god, what? I could still see that it was incredibly well written, and I thought the internal logic, even though I didn't get it, the internal logic did follow. So I could appreciate it from the point of view of being well written, well structured, and just a generally like a talented author. But in terms of my actual just plain enjoyment, that was a bit lower. So yeah, that's where we went with that one. Next up is a book that I read in October, and that is Solutions and Other Problems by Allie Brosh. This is a graphic novel memoir, so because it is a memoir, I haven't given it a rating because I don't feel like non-fiction is something that I can rate, particularly when it's a memoir, so it's about someone's actual life. But certainly in terms of how I use CAWPILE, which is character, action, and so on. It's very centered around more of a fiction. This is not. So I really enjoyed this one. As you guys no doubt are aware, I don't tend to read graphic novels, so this is a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I really enjoyed the author's blog, which is Hyperbole and a Half. So that's a web comic blog that's quite old now, but I really enjoyed that one. I was introduced to it by a lecturer at university. Anyway, and yeah, I thought it was great. So I heard about this on Olive from a Book Olive's channel, and I thought, yes, I really want to get a hold of that. So I did. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. The art style is very simple and kind of comedic. And in fact, the entire prose, if that's the right word, is quite simple and comedic. So if you are a fan of the medium of graphic novels, if you read a lot of graphic novels, manga, comics, that sort of thing, you may not get as much out of this, particularly if you're interested in that genre as a art form, a visual art form. But I just really enjoyed it. Like I said, it's very comedic and humorous, but the topics aren't necessarily comedic and humorous. So although she has some anecdotes from childhood and different things that are quite amusing, the overall tone of the book isn't intended to be amusing. It talks about depression, anxiety, and different experiences that Allie has had. But it does so in, like I said, very comedic and very amusing stories. But yeah, that's that. The next 3 books I read all in October as well. Anyway, so the next book is Amal, Unbound by Aisha Saeed, which, first of all, look at that cover. So this is a middle grade, and it is about a young girl called Amal who lives in, I am 90% sure that it is set in Pakistan. So they live in Pakistan and they aren't particularly well off. Her mother is basically suffering from postnatal depression, so she's the oldest girl. While her father's at work, she kind of has to take on a lot of the duties of the household. And so she goes to the markets and she comes across a man who's incredibly rude to her, so she is quite rude back. But unfortunately, it turns out that he is the landowner and therefore landlord of basically the entire village. And that then leads to her being sent off to become a servant in his household. Yeah, so I really enjoyed this one. It's quite sad in a lot of ways, certainly in the fact that Amal is taken from her family and taken out of school and put to work because of something that she had, a mistake that she made because she was rude to someone, but you know, we've all been there. But certainly in terms of something, her being basically owned by someone as a way of paying off debt, to me, it was just not something that I ever have experienced again. So that was quite confronting, but I think it was really well written. I really enjoyed Amal's character. I really thought that the author really immersed you in this story of this girl and really gave you a very clear understanding of what was going on and what she was feeling, and yeah, all of that. So I definitely recommend this one. I do think that this would be a fantastic book to have in a school library and potentially for year 7, year 8s to read and to study, because I think that it would be a really good way of learning about other people's situations and cultures and so on. I gave this one 8.57 on CAWPILE, which is another 4 stars. Next up, we have another non-fiction, The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. Unlike Allie Brosh, this is not a memoir, this is a non-fiction prose, I guess. So this is about 2 different men. One is Daniel Burnham and the other is H.H. Holmes. So it follows their 2 different stories. Daniel Burnham is one of the architects principally responsible for the Chicago World Fair in 1893, and the other person that we follow is H.H. Holmes, who was a serial killer during that time. I thought that this would have a little bit more about Holmes and about what he did. It didn't follow him as much, it didn't have as much information about him as I was expecting. It was a lot more about the World Fair and about that construction of the World Fair, and there was a lot actually about the Ferris wheel and how it was created. This was part of Chloe from Chloe Reads Books book club, which is called Chloe's Crime Scene Corner. Quite a few people in the Discord were a bit disappointed because they were wanting more information about Holmes and they didn't feel like it was as 50-50 as they were expecting it to be. I definitely thought that would be the case and thought that it would be more 50-50 than it was, but I wasn't really disappointed. I found the World Fair, I mean, it did drag a little bit, the stuff about the World Fair, but I did still find it really interesting, and particularly the Ferris wheel, I thought that was really, really interesting. But yeah, I was expecting a little bit more of the Holmes stuff, but I still really, really enjoyed what we got of it. He was quite a creepy dude, and yeah, that was really interesting to hear about, although kind of creepy and gross, but still, I signed up for a serial killer book, so I really should have expected that. I thought this was really, really readable. It doesn't read, although you know it's non-fiction, it doesn't read like non-fiction. It reads more like mystery, which I thought was really well done. The only thing with that though is that, and I think this is more about how I expect non-fiction to be structured, is that they do have a lot of end notes in the end of the book, but I was expecting throughout the book there to be notation so you knew what the end notes were, and that wasn't there, so it read a lot more like fiction, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, like I said, but every now and then I found myself thinking, surely that didn't happen. Well, how do you know that? But it's all in the back here. So they obviously did their research. But yeah, I didn't give this a rating because, again, non-fiction. I haven't figured out a way to rate non-fiction, but I did really, really enjoy it. If you're interested in true crime, I would highly recommend that you join us in Chloe's Crime Scene Corner, and I certainly would suggest you read this book. The next book, and the second to last book that I'm going to talk about today, is They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. Unfortunately, I was a little bit let down by this one. Now, having said that, I still gave it 3 stars. In CAWPILE, it got 6.66, which, like I said, is 3 stars. So it's not like I disliked it. It was a middle of the road book for me. It was okay. There were some elements that I enjoyed and some elements that I didn't enjoy. I think partly the hype killed it a little bit for me, which I've noticed has happened a bit with BookTube, but particularly with young adult, I think. Not sure if that's just simply because, like I said before, that was quite some time ago, so I'm definitely not the target audience. So I don't know if it's just simply that I don't get as much out of young adult as I used to. I don't know. In this book, we follow 2 main characters. Both get a phone call from an organisation called Deathcast to tell them that they're going to die today. So Deathcast, somehow, and it's never explained, it somehow there's now a thing whereby people get told when they're going to die. So they get a phone call the day from this organisation called Deathcast. They don't know when that day they're going to die, they just know that they are going to die that day. So they could potentially have 24 hours, or they could have an hour, or they could have 5 minutes. They don't know. But because this is a thing now in society, the whole of society has changed to a certain extent, whereby you now have whole businesses centred around this idea that people are going to die, including things like a website where you can find your final friend. I think that's what they call it. And so they kind of connect people who are going to die up with other people who are going to die, or people who are just wanting to support those people to kind of have a last friend. Maybe it's last friend. Anyway, so we follow these 2 characters who get the phone call, and it's about them kind of finding a life on their last day, finding each other, because it is a bit of a romance. Yeah, so that is the premise. I thought the premise was quite interesting. My problem with it was twofold. First of all, it's one of those books where there is a sci-fi element, but the sci-fi element is not the point of the story. So it's not really explored how or why that happens, which is fine. It's not always necessary. However, in this book, I felt like the author didn't really use it very well. So we follow these 2 main characters, but there were certain points throughout the story where we had different people who weren't connected to the characters specifically. There was one person who worked for Deathcast who actually made the phone calls. I think someone who was the ex-partner of one of the people but something. Anyway, different little spotlights on different people who weren't part of the overall storyline, but I didn't think that that was necessary unless you were doing it to explore Deathcast itself and how that worked and what it was, but they weren't doing that. So I don't know why they were there, because they were just little they weren't part of the main story. They were part of something that wasn't really explored, so I'm not sure what the purpose of it was. But because Adam Silvera spent time on those little excerpts from different characters, we didn't get as much time with the two main characters and their story as I think would have been good to sell the story. And so as it was, I didn't really feel like I had the time to get to know these characters, to care about these characters. So obviously the whole point is that we know they're both going to die at the end. We're told it in the name of the book. So even if you don't read the blurb, even if you don't watch BookTube, even if you don't know anything about it, you'd still get an idea that someone, at least one, but probably more than one, people are going to die at the end. I would think, therefore, that you would spend more time and make more of an effort to make sure that people cared about these characters, because otherwise, what's the point? But I felt like he didn't do either thing very well, because he didn't tell us what Deathcast was about or explore that in any way. So why have the little bits of other people, but then at the same time, again, why have them? Because it took away from the main characters and any exploration of their characters and any reason why I would care about the fact that they're going to die at the end. So I said that I gave this 3 stars, but now while I'm talking about this, I feel like I need to drop at least half a star. It was okay written, and I liked the premise. It just didn't live up to the premise, and I felt like if he'd done one or the other of those things, he would have made a better book, basically. So I think it's now actually a 2.5. I'm going to leave it as 3 stars on Goodreads because I can see why people like it. It didn't work for me. Sorry if it's one of your favourite books. Unfortunately, I was reading it with Connor and it is one of his favourite books. So sorry about that, Connor. Sorry, Erik, because it was one of the books that Erik from Break Even Books suggested to me as part of my BookTube birthday video. I'll link it below if you want to go check that out. But he recommended this book to me and yeah, just wasn't for me. Anyway, what can you do? The final book that I want to talk to you about today is Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. I really enjoyed this one. It is literary fiction. It has that tendency that literary fiction sometimes can have, whereby it's a little bit meandering. You don't always feel like you know exactly what the point of some of what's being said is. It definitely has a plot, but it's sort of, like I said, very meandering. We go on lots of tangents, but I really enjoyed it and I didn't find the tangents. They were interesting and I could definitely see why they were part of the story, even as you kind of were just flowing along down the river. Yeah, it probably isn't for everyone because it is that very meandering literary fiction kind of thing, but yeah, like I said, I really, really enjoyed it. So I'm just going to read the first line of the blurb to you just to give you an idea. I was born twice. First as a baby girl on a remarkably smogless Detroit day in January of 1960, and then again as a teenage boy in an emergency room near Petoskey, Michigan in August of 1974. So it is about Calliope or Cal. They are a young person in the States in between the 60s and 80s. So it follows them throughout their lives. It actually starts with their grandparents. So it's a very exhaustive book in that regard, but it follows the grandparents and then the parents and then their lives. And Calliope is a hermaphrodite. So they are born with both sexual organs, but they don't realize that. The doctors don't notice that when they're born. And so they live up until their teenage, up until this accident happens when they are in their, what did it say? It doesn't say. I think 14 or 15. And that's when this accident happens and that's when it's discovered. And then it's about what happens from there and how people deal with that, their family, themselves, etc. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was incredibly well written, and yeah, I would really, really recommend if you like The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt or that kind of literary fiction. I think you'd really enjoy this one. I'm actually just going to read the little kind of review that I wrote that I put on Goodreads just to give you an idea of, yeah, what else I thought. This book was fascinating. There are so many different topics discussed in this book, from an exploration into immigration and being a refugee, family relationships, sexuality, body dysmorphia, gender and sexual identity, acceptance and self-identity. This is a contemporary literary fiction which can be quite meandering and wordy. Sometimes this felt a little dense and hard to read, but mostly I found it very interesting and enjoyable to read. Jeffrey Eugenides is an excellent writer, drawing a picture of an immigrant family finding their way in a changing America and a young person's journey of self-discovery. So there you go. I gave it 8 on CAWPILE, which is 4 stars. So those are all the contemporary, literary, historical and non-fiction books that I read in the last 3 months. No classics in the last 3 months. Please comment below if you have any thoughts on any of the books that I talked about, if you have read any of the books, if you're intending to read any of the books. If you would like to leave me a comment but you don't know what, then please leave me some kind of plant emoji, because we have quite a few plants on the covers of these books, or these two anyway. In honor of these 2 books, please leave me a plant emoji. All of my social media details are listed in the description below, so if you'd like to go and follow me on any of those other platforms, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. Like I said, thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.